about the story of Moses and the burning bush, we throw in our heads a whole bunch of details that aren't actually there. The first one, I think, is we imagine that Moses is on this mountain, tending the flocks, and he goes around a bend and suddenly sees this burning bush. And if you had gone there 3 minutes earlier, there would have been nothing there. But suddenly it appears, and Moses appears just in time as it shows up. And if you were to go back to that spot after Moses' encounter, 3 minutes later, the burning bush would disappear too. It was just there to have this one encounter for Moses, and then it served its function. And I imagine that most of us have made the assumption, because there's nothing in the story to make you think any differently, that Moses is the only person who ever sees that bush. But what if that's not true? What if other people came across that bush? You know, I decided in my retirement years, many years from now, that maybe I'll write a book of short stories, and I will title it Tales of the Burning Bush. And we'll have stories of people who saw the bush and ran away, and we'll have stories of people who went up to the bush and God called to them from the bush and told them to take off their sandals, and the whole thing that we hear about with Moses. And told them to go and do something. And some of them did it, and some of them didn't do it. And we would have a whole series of possible stories of people's lives that were changed because of their encounter with the burning bush. Because there's nothing about this story that says that this was unique to Moses. All we know is what we haven't been told is any other possibilities. Because I believe that the burning bush represents a particular moment in Moses' time in his life, the type of moment that can happen for many of us. The burning bush is that moment when Moses is confronted with the fact that he has not faced up to either his past or his destiny. If you remember the story, we skipped over it between last week and this week, so you have to pull this one out of memory. You might remember the story of, especially if you've seen the Ten Commandments 1,000 times, the story of Moses includes a part about him being an adult in Egypt, having grown up in the Pharaoh's house as son to Pharaoh's daughter, and seeing one of the officials badly treat one of the Israelites, beat him. And because he sees this awful event, Moses, in his rage, kills that official. But not in secret. Somebody else notices it and calls him out on it. So Moses flees. And 20 years later, Moses is living out in the middle of the Sinai desert. He's gotten married, had some kids, and he is tending the flocks of his father-in-law, it says. It's kind of like those stories that every now you hear about somebody who is on the FBI's most wanted list. It turns out that for having robbed some bank in the 70s and driven a getaway car or something, and it turns out that they're living as a housewife in Connecticut suburbs, and have completely rebuilt their life, and everybody who knows them thinks they're just a wonderful person. That's Moses. He's out here living in life and not even thinking about what's going on back in Egypt. So when he comes to face with the burning bush, Moses is confronted with the fact that it's time for him to go back. It's time for him to go back because he has a job to do in freeing the people of Israel from slavery. But in order to be able to do that, he has to face his past back in Egypt. Now, truthfully, he's pretty fortunate. Nobody seems to remember him or wants to bring it up by the time he gets there. But at this point in time, the story that we're hearing today, he doesn't know that. And amazingly, not amazingly at all, amazingly, he is a little reluctant about this. And so the story tells us, we heard part of it today, it tells us he starts bargaining with God about all the things he's going to need in order to go back. First it tells us that, well, who shall I tell the people of Israel that you are? And there's been books written on how to translate I am who I am, or I am that I am, or I will be who I will be. It's and some that say that you should never try to translate it at all because it's the name of God. We'll just call him I am. God says, tell them I am sent you. And then in the story that's a little later than what we read today, we hear that he says, but I'm a really terrible speaker, God, and I can't say the words, and my mouth, I fumble every time I try to say something, and God says, good, okay, you've got a brother, Aaron. He talks really good. We'll let him do the spokesperson for you. And then Moses says, but I don't have anything to show them that your power is here, and what am I going to do to prove that this is really from you? And God says, okay, here's your Harry Potter wand. Throw it on the ground, it'll turn into a snake. Point it at the water, it'll turn to blood. That's some neat tricks. Go. Finally, Moses gives in and goes back to meet his destiny by confronting his past. Here's the thing. I do think we run into versions of the burning bush all the time. We do as individuals, we do as a church, we do as a nation, we do in all the configurations of our life. Come to those places and those moments when we have to face up to what has gone before in order to move ahead. And in this nation, I think we have been hitting up against that burning bush again and again and again. And I think particularly as Christians, we have been facing it and we don't want to see it. Most recently, I'd say we ran right up against it in Charlottesville, where once again we came face to face with the ugly history of this nation, and we as Christians have to face it, particularly because we gave the theology to what happened. We gave God's justification to slavery. But all of us have to face this as a burning bush moment, which is odd because it seems to make Charlottesville into holy ground, and maybe it is. Maybe not quite like that burning bush, but I always find that image of a burning bush on sacred ground strange anyway, because that's sacred ground being fraught with danger at the same time. We have a past that we've yet to face. And as long as we do not face it, we cannot reach our destiny. We come into this time and again, and we back off and make ourselves one of the stories for my book of the people who said no. We cannot keep saying no. somewhere along the line, the excuses for why we cannot do what God calls us to have to fall away. So, yes, Moses was the yes but guy, and we've learned that very well. But we seem to forget that in the end, he stopped that and went. So are we going to take our lives and follow in Moses' steps to where we become a people who are welcoming of all, aware of our past, but not being held back by it constantly? A people who gather people in God's name rather than scattering them. A people who refuse to be held captive by what we've done, but are open and honest enough to face it. That's who God is calling us to be in this day, in this time. And sadly, we know there will be one more Charlottesville burning bush incident for us. Will it finally be the one that gets us to say yes? Amen.
Amen.